There is something sacred about the morning, something quietly powerful in the way the light stretches its fingers across the earth, inviting us to begin again. This Thursday, April 16th, is not just another day on the calendar. It is a fresh page, unwritten, waiting for the steady hand of your intention and the gentle guidance of your spirit. We awaken not merely to exist, but to walk with clarity, to see beyond confusion, beyond fear, into the truth that steadies our steps. We rise to make wise decisions, not in haste or worry, but in the calm assurance that wisdom lives within us, whispering when we are still enough to listen. And we step forward in peace, not the fragile kind that trembles at trouble, but the deep-rooted peace that stands firm even when the winds of uncertainty try to shake our ground. This morning prayer is not just words spoken into the air. It is a declaration that today we will walk with purpose, that today we will choose wisely, that today we will guard our peace as something precious, something divine. So let us gather our thoughts, steady our hearts, and step into this day with courage, with grace, and with a spirit that refuses to be anything less than whole. There is a hush that rests upon the world before the full rising of the sun, a sacred stillness that asks nothing of us except to notice it, to breathe it in, to remember that we have been granted something we did not earn but are still called to honor. This morning arrives like a quiet blessing wrapped in light, unfolding itself gently across the edges of our lives, reminding us that we are still here, still breathing, still held by a mercy greater than our understanding. And in this simple truth lies the first great invitation of the day, to embrace the gift of a new morning, not as a routine occurrence, but as a divine unfolding. For too often we wake as though life is owed to us, as though time is a river that must continue flowing without pause or gratitude. Yet the morning teaches otherwise. It whispers with the patience of ancient things that each dawn is a second chance wrapped in golden light, a reminder that yesterday, with all its triumphs and its heartbreaks, has already been gathered into the past, and what remains is this moment, soft, untested, waiting for us to shape it with intention. To embrace the gift of a new morning is to stand still long enough to feel its weight and its wonder. It is to acknowledge that the breath in our lungs is not guaranteed, but granted. It is to recognize that even the most weary heart is allowed to begin again. And so we do not rush past the morning as if it is a hallway leading somewhere more important. Instead, we pause, we listen. We allow the light to teach us something about gentleness. There is wisdom in the way dawn arrives without violence. It does not force itself upon the earth. It does not demand attention with shouting or shaking. Instead, it arrives with grace, with patience, with a steady unfolding that reminds us how transformation is often quiet before it is visible. And perhaps we too are invited to live this way, to allow our lives to unfold rather than erupt, to grow rather than force, to become rather than demand. When we embrace the gift of a new morning, we are also choosing to forgive time for what it could not fix yesterday. We are choosing not to carry the full weight of yesterday's mistakes into today's possibilities. There is a sacred courage in this decision, for it is not always easy to release what has already rooted itself in memory. Some burdens cling like shadows that do not want to be left behind. Some regrets speak loudly in the early hours, reminding us of what we wish we had done differently. And yet the morning does not ask us to remain imprisoned by those echoes. It asks us instead to rise. To rise does not mean to forget, it means to continue. It means to place one foot in front of the other even when the heart is still learning how to forgive itself. It means to understand that we are not defined by the closing of yesterday's chapters, but by the opening of today's pages. And so, as the light stretches itself across the land, it also stretches itself across our inner world. It touches the corners of our doubt. It warms the cold places where fear has taken up residence. It softens the sharp edges of worry that often try to shape our thinking before we are even fully awake. And in that gentle illumination we are reminded that clarity does not always arrive as thunder. Sometimes it arrives as light. To embrace the gift of a new morning is to accept that we are being offered something sacred. The opportunity to begin again without needing to explain why we needed a new beginning in the first place. The earth does not question the sun when it rises again. The sky does not hesitate to receive its light. In the same way, we are invited to receive this day without apology, without hesitation, without the heavy burden of self-condemnation. There is a quiet dignity in allowing oneself to start over. It is the dignity of understanding that life is not a straight line of perfection, but a continuous rhythm of learning, unlearning, and becoming. Each morning is a teacher dressed in light, asking us to listen more carefully to the way our lives are unfolding. And if we are willing to listen, we may hear something even deeper beneath the surface of the morning, the reminder that we are not alone in this unfolding. There is a presence, whether named in faith or felt in spirit, that walks with us into the day. It does not remove the challenges that may come, but it steadies us within them. It does not silence every storm, but it teaches us how to stand within the rain without losing ourselves. This is why the morning is not merely a time of day, it is a spiritual threshold, a place where who we were meets who we are becoming, a space where intention can be planted like seeds into the soil of time. And what we plant in these early moments often shapes the harvest of our hours. So we must ask ourselves gently, without judgment, what are we planting as we step into this day? Are we planting worry or are we planting trust? Are we planting haste or are we planting presence? Are we planting fear or are we planting faith in our ability to walk through whatever comes with dignity intact? To embrace the gift of a new morning is to choose wisely in these unseen moments. It is to understand that the mind, when left unguarded, can rush toward fear, but the spirit, when awakened, can return us to peace. And peace is not passive. It is an active decision to remain grounded even when circumstances are not. There is also something profoundly healing about the repetition of mornings. No matter how heavy yesterday may have been, the morning still comes. No matter how uncertain the night felt, light still returns. This constancy is not accidental. It is a lesson written into creation itself, that renewal is always possible, that endings are not final, and that hope is not a fragile thing, but a persistent force woven into the fabric of existence. When we allow ourselves to truly embrace this, we begin to walk differently through the day. We do not walk as those who are defeated before the first challenge arises. We walk as those who have already been reminded that newness is always within reach. We walk as those who have been given another chance, not because we earned it, but because grace is generous. And perhaps the greatest truth hidden within the morning is this, that we are also new. Not only the day, but we. We are not fixed beings trapped in yesterday's identity. We are evolving, shifting, growing in ways both visible and unseen. The morning does not only renew the world around us, it invites renewal within us. So let us not overlook this sacred beginning. Let us not treat it as something ordinary. Let us receive it with reverence, with awareness, with gratitude that rises not from obligation but from recognition. For every morning is a quiet declaration that life continues to trust us with itself. And as we step into this day, we do so not as weary travelers without direction, but as beings held by possibility. We do so with the understanding that even if we do not yet know the shape of the entire journey, we are still capable of taking the next faithful step. The morning does not demand perfection from us. It simply asks us to begin. Clarity does not arrive like a sudden storm breaking open the sky with noise and urgency. It does not always announce itself with certainty or grand revelation. More often it comes quietly, like a soft light slipping through the narrow spaces of a closed curtain, patient and persistent, waiting for us to notice it. And yet when it is finally seen, it changes everything. It does not shout at us to move faster. It simply shows us where we stand, and in that showing, it gives us the rare and precious gift of truth. To walk with clarity of mind and heart is to resist the temptation of confusion that often masquerades as urgency. It is to pause when the world demands speed, to breathe when pressure demands panic, and to listen when noise demands reaction. For the human mind, left unattended, can become a crowded room where every thought speaks at once, each one trying to be the loudest, the most urgent, the most feared. But clarity is not born in that kind of chaos. It is born in stillness. It is born when we decide that not every voice within us deserves immediate authority. There is a sacred discipline in choosing clarity. It is not passive, it is not accidental. It is a practice of gentle courage, the courage to step back from emotional storms long enough to see their shape. It is the courage to say, I will not decide from my wound, I will not choose from my fear. I will not move only because I am unsettled. And in this restraint, something powerful begins to emerge, perspective. Perspective is the quiet companion of clarity. It arrives when we stop standing too close to the moment that troubles us. It asks us to take one step back, then another, until what once felt overwhelming begins to reveal its true proportions. What once felt like a mountain may, from a distance, become a hill that can be climbed. What once felt like an ending may reveal itself as a turning point. What once felt like confusion may slowly begin to arrange itself into understanding. But to reach this place, the heart must also be involved. For clarity is not only an intellectual exercise, it is not merely the sharpening of thought. It is the alignment of thought with truth, and truth lives not only in the mind but in the heart as well. A mind without heart can become cold calculation, and a heart without mind can become drifting emotion. But when the two walk together, something holy happens. Wisdom is born. To walk with clarity of mind and heart, then, is to allow both reason and compassion to sit at the same table within us. It is to let logic speak without silencing empathy, and to let empathy speak without ignoring wisdom. It is to understand that not every decision must be rushed, and not every feeling must be obeyed immediately. Some feelings are messengers, not masters. They come to inform, not to command. There are mornings when clarity feels far away, when the soul feels like a fog-covered field where every direction looks the same. In such moments, it is easy to believe that confusion is permanent, that uncertainty is a fixed state of being. But clarity is never truly absent. It is only waiting beneath the noise, like the sun behind heavy clouds, unchanged in its presence even when hidden from view. And so we learn to wait, not with passivity but with trust. We learn to resist the urge to force answers from a mind that is still unsettled. For forced answers are often false answers, shaped more by anxiety than by truth. Instead, we allow silence to do its gentle work. We allow time to soften the edges of urgency. We allow breath to become a bridge between confusion and understanding. In this waiting, something subtle begins to shift. The mind, once crowded, begins to settle. The heart, once restless, begins to steady. And in that quiet space, clarity begins to rise, not as an explosion, but as an unveiling. There is also a deep honesty required in walking with clarity. We must be willing to tell ourselves the truth, even when it is uncomfortable. We must be willing to admit when we do not know, when we are afraid, when we are uncertain. For denial is one of the greatest distortions of clarity. It bends reality into shapes that feel safer but are not true. And while illusion may offer temporary comfort, it cannot guide us forward with integrity. Clarity asks us to be brave enough to see things as they are, not as we wish them to be, and not as we fear them to be. It asks us to stand in the middle of reality without turning away. And though this can feel like a heavy task, it is also deeply liberating. For truth, even when difficult, is lighter to carry than confusion dressed as certainty. To walk with clarity of mind and heart is also to recognize the difference between reaction and response. Reaction is immediate, often driven by emotion alone. It is the sudden spark that can ignite unnecessary fire. Response, however, is measured. It listens before it speaks. It considers before it moves. It honors both feeling and understanding. And in choosing response over reaction, we choose dignity over chaos. There is wisdom in slowing down the space between stimulus and action. In that small gap, clarity has room to enter. Without that space, we become slaves to impulse, pushed and pulled by every passing emotion. But with that space, we become stewards of our own direction. And so clarity becomes a form of inner leadership. It teaches us how to guide ourselves when no one else is guiding us. It teaches us how to trust the quiet intelligence within, the part of us that knows more than fear allows us to believe. For beneath the layers of doubt and distraction, there is a steady knowing, a compass that does not shout but consistently points toward truth. Yet clarity does not mean certainty about everything. It does not promise that every question will be answered immediately or that every path will be visible from the start. Rather, it offers something more practical and more enduring. The ability to take the next right step even when the whole staircase is not visible. This is where faith and clarity meet. Faith does not require full sight. Clarity does not require full knowledge. Together they create movement in the midst of uncertainty. They allow us to walk forward without pretending that we see everything, while still trusting that what we do see is enough for the moment. There is also a quiet humility in clarity. It reminds us that we are not required to know everything. It frees us from the exhausting burden of false certainty. It allows us to say, I am learning, instead of pretending that we are finished learning. And in that humility there is peace. For confusion is often heavy because it demands control. It demands that we hold everything at once, that we solve everything immediately, that we never pause or falter. But clarity releases that demand. It says you may take this step and then the next will be shown. It invites us into trust rather than tension. And when we begin to walk in this way, when we begin to allow clarity of mind and heart to guide us, we notice something remarkable. Life does not necessarily become easier, but it becomes more navigable. Challenges still arise, but they no longer define us as quickly. Decisions still come, but they no longer overwhelm us as deeply. We begin to move through life not as those who are constantly lost, but as those who are learning how to see. In the end, clarity is not a destination. It is a practice. It is a way of being in the world that must be chosen again and again, especially when confusion tries to return. And each time we choose it, we strengthen our ability to remain steady within ourselves. So we walk forward, not perfectly, but honestly. Not always with full understanding, but with willingness. Not without questions, but with trust that answers will come in time. And in this way, we learn that clarity is not something we find once and keep forever. It is something we return to again and again as we return to ourselves. Wisdom does not always announce itself with grandeur. It does not arrive wearing the robes of certainty or speaking in the loud language of urgency. More often, wisdom comes quietly, like an elder seated in the corner of a room, watching, waiting, speaking only when the heart has grown still enough to listen. And in a world that moves quickly, where decisions are often demanded before understanding has taken root, wisdom becomes not a loud voice but a patient one. To seek wisdom in every decision is to resist the temptation of haste. It is to understand that not every moment requires immediate action, and not every pressure deserves immediate obedience. There is a difference between urgency and importance, and wisdom teaches us how to tell them apart. Urgency shouts, wisdom whispers. Urgency pushes, wisdom guides. Urgency often comes from fear, but wisdom rises from understanding. And so the one who seeks wisdom must first learn the discipline of pause. This pause is not delay born of indecision, but space created for clarity to enter. It is the sacred breath between thought and action, where the soul is allowed to catch up with the mind. In that space, something profound happens. The noise begins to settle, and what remains is often the truth that was there all along, waiting patiently beneath the surface of emotion. There are moments in life when decisions arrive like storms, fast and unrelenting, demanding immediate answers. In those moments, the heart may race, the mind may scatter, and fear may attempt to take the throne of judgment. But wisdom does not sit comfortably in panic. It does not thrive in emotional turbulence. It requires steadiness, it requires grounding, it requires a willingness to step back, even if only for a moment, to ask a deeper question: what is truly being asked of me here? To seek wisdom is to ask that question not once but repeatedly until the surface of confusion begins to give way to deeper understanding. It is to recognize that every decision carries weight beyond the present moment. What we choose today becomes the architecture of tomorrow. And so wisdom asks us not only what feels right now, but what will remain right when time has passed and emotion has settled. There is a sacred humility in this kind of seeking. It is the humility of acknowledging that we do not know everything. In a world that often rewards quick answers and confident appearances, it takes courage to admit uncertainty. Yet wisdom begins exactly there, in the honest admission that we are still learning how to see clearly. For when we pretend to know what we do not know, we close the door to guidance. But when we remain open, even in uncertainty, we allow space for deeper insight to enter, and insight rarely arrives through force. It comes gently through reflection, through experience, through listening to others, to circumstances, and to the quiet voice within. That inner voice is often the most overlooked teacher. It does not compete with the loudness of external opinion. It does not insist or demand. Instead, it speaks in subtle ways, through unease when something is not aligned, through peace when something is right, through a steady sense of knowing that does not require explanation. But to hear it, we must become willing to silence the chorus of external influence long enough to recognize its tone. Wisdom in decision-making is not about isolating ourselves from others. It is about discerning which voices are rooted in love and understanding, and which are rooted in fear, projection, or confusion. Not every opinion deserves equal authority in our lives. Some voices are helpful guides, while others are merely echoes of someone else's uncertainty. To seek wisdom is also to understand the importance of experience. Not all lessons come through instruction. Many come through living. Every choice we have made in the past carries within it a fragment of teaching. Even the choices we now regret have shaped our understanding, sharpening our awareness of what leads to peace and what leads away from it. Wisdom does not erase those experiences. It gathers them, honors them, and uses them as stepping stones toward better discernment. And yet, wisdom is not bound only to the past. It is also deeply rooted in presence. For the present moment is where all decisions are ultimately made. We cannot choose yesterday, and tomorrow has not yet arrived. All we truly hold is now. And so wisdom invites us to be fully present with the decision before us, rather than being pulled into regret or anxiety. Regret looks backward and says, if only. Anxiety looks forward and says, what if? But wisdom stands firmly in the middle and says, what is? It deals with reality as it is, not as it might have been or might become. And in doing so, it offers stability. There is also quiet strength in seeking counsel when needed. Wisdom does not insist on isolation. It understands that clarity can sometimes be found through conversation, through trusted guidance, through the sharing of perspective. But even in seeking counsel, discernment is required. For wisdom is not found in simply collecting opinions. It is found in weighing them carefully, comparing them against truth, and sensing what aligns with integrity. Integrity, after all, is one of wisdom's closest companions. A decision rooted in wisdom is one that does not require us to betray our deepest values. It does not ask us to become someone we are not in order to achieve a desired outcome. Instead, it aligns our actions with our principles, even when that alignment is not easy. And here lies one of the most profound truths about wisdom. It is not always convenient. The wise decision is not always the easiest one. It may require patience when impatience feels more comfortable. It may require honesty when silence would be easier. It may require stepping away from what is familiar in order to step toward what is right. But in the long view of life, wisdom always proves itself to be the more faithful companion. There is a kind of courage required to choose wisely. It is not the loud courage of confrontation, but the quiet courage of alignment. It is the courage to choose what is right even when what is right is not popular. It is the courage to delay gratification in favor of long-term peace. It is the courage to trust that clarity will come if we remain faithful to truth rather than rushing toward convenience. And in this journey, patience becomes essential. Wisdom rarely reveals itself in full at the beginning of a decision. Often it unfolds gradually, revealing only what is necessary for the next step. This can be uncomfortable for a mind that desires certainty, but it is precisely in this gradual unfolding that trust is developed. To seek wisdom in every decision is also to recognize the importance of consequences. Every choice carries ripples. Some are immediate, others are delayed. Some are visible, others are hidden. Wisdom teaches us to consider not only what a decision will bring today, but what it may shape tomorrow, and what it may leave behind in the lives of others. For no decision exists in isolation. Our choices touch lives beyond our own understanding. They influence relationships, shape environments, and contribute to the broader story of our existence. And so wisdom expands our vision beyond ourselves. It invites us to consider not only personal gain, but collective impact. Yet, even with all this consideration, wisdom does not paralyze us. It does not trap us in endless analysis. There comes a point where reflection must become action, and wisdom knows when that moment arrives. It does not delay out of fear. It moves forward out of clarity. There is peace in a decision made with wisdom, even if the outcome is uncertain. For such a decision is not rooted in recklessness, but in thoughtful alignment. It carries within it the assurance that we did not act blindly, but with care, with attention, with sincerity. And perhaps this is the deepest gift of seeking wisdom in every decision. It frees us from the torment of self-betrayal. When we choose hastily, we often carry the weight of wondering whether we ignored something important within ourselves. But when we choose wisely, even if the outcome is not perfect, we rest in the knowledge that we acted with integrity. So we learn slowly and faithfully to slow down, to listen more deeply, to consider more carefully, to trust the process of discernment rather than the impulse of reaction. And in doing so, we discover that wisdom is not distant or rare. It is available moment by moment in every decision that asks for our attention. And when we begin to live this way, something within us changes. We no longer move through life as those who are constantly reacting, but as those who are learning how to respond. We become more grounded, more thoughtful, more aligned with truth. And in that alignment there is peace. For wisdom does not only guide our decisions, it shapes the way we carry ourselves through the world. Peace is not a quiet accident that falls upon the lives of the fortunate. It is not something that simply arrives because the world has decided to be kind. Peace is a choice, deliberate, often difficult, sometimes defiant. It is the decision to remain rooted when everything around us seems determined to uproot us. It is the sacred act of saying, even in the midst of noise, I will not abandon myself to chaos. Chaos is rarely loud at first. It often begins subtly as a disturbance in thought, a tightening in the chest, a flicker of worry that grows when left unobserved. It moves through the mind like an uninvited guest, rearranging certainty into confusion, replacing stillness with urgency, and convincing us that everything must be handled immediately or it will be lost forever. And if we are not careful, we begin to believe it. But peace is a different kind of presence. It does not compete with chaos in volume. It does not shout to be heard. Instead, it remains steady like deep water beneath a stormy surface, unchanged by the turbulence above. And to choose peace over chaos is to learn how to descend beneath the noise, to return again and again to that deeper place within ourselves where truth is not trembling. There are days when the world demands our emotional participation in every disturbance it presents. It offers us reasons to worry, reasons to rush, reasons to react, reasons to fear what has not yet arrived. In such moments, chaos feels persuasive. It disguises itself as responsibility. It tells us that if we are not constantly engaged in tension, we are somehow neglecting life itself. But peace gently corrects this illusion. It reminds us that not every fire requires our hands, not every storm requires our voice, not every battle requires our surrender of inner calm. To choose peace over chaos is to practice discernment in the midst of emotional noise. It is to recognize that not every thought deserves equal authority. Some thoughts arise from fear, shaped by past wounds or imagined futures. Others arise from clarity, grounded in the present moment. The work of peace is learning to tell the difference between the two, and this is not always easy work. For the human heart is sensitive, responsive, deeply connected to the world around it. When others are anxious, we may feel that anxiety as if it were our own. When conflict arises, we may feel pulled into its center, even if we stand at its edges. And yet peace asks something extraordinary of us. It asks us to remain anchored even when the waters around us are unsettled. There is a kind of courage required for this anchoring. Not the courage of confrontation, but the courage of restraint. The courage to pause before reacting. The courage to breathe before responding. The courage to say, I will not allow this moment to define my inner state without my permission. This is not denial of reality. It is the refusal to be consumed by it. Peace does not mean the absence of difficulty. It does not mean life becomes smooth or predictable. Rather, it means that within difficulty, we do not abandon our center. We learn to carry calm within the storm. We learn to walk through uncertainty without becoming it. And in doing so, we discover that peace is not dependent on circumstance, but on practice. There is also a profound discipline in choosing peace. It requires attention. It requires awareness of what we allow into our minds, what conversations we engage in, what environments we remain in, what narratives we repeat to ourselves when no one else is listening. For chaos is often fed by repetition, repeated worry, repeated fear, repeated exposure to voices that unsettle rather than ground us. And peace grows in the opposite direction. It grows through intentional stillness, through mindful boundaries, through the gentle refusal to absorb what disturbs our inner order. Sometimes choosing peace means stepping away, not out of avoidance, but out of preservation. It means recognizing when a conversation is no longer constructive, when an environment is no longer nourishing, when an internal dialogue has become harmful rather than helpful. And in those moments, peace gives us permission to withdraw, not to escape life, but to preserve our ability to engage it wisely. There is also a quiet strength in not responding immediately to every emotional impulse. The world often rewards speed, especially in reaction, but peace teaches us the value of delay, the sacred space between stimulus and response where wisdom can enter. In that space, we are no longer controlled by the first wave of emotion. We become observers of it, capable of choosing how we will move forward rather than being pushed forward by it. And so we learn that peace is not passive. It is active. It is a form of inner leadership. It is the daily decision to govern the self with gentleness and firmness at the same time. Gentleness toward our own humanity, recognizing that we will feel deeply and sometimes struggle to remain steady. Firmness in refusing to surrender our inner world to disorder. There are moments when chaos feels like it has already won, when the mind is crowded, the heart is restless, and clarity feels far away. In those moments, peace does not demand perfection. It does not ask us to suddenly become unshaken. Instead, it invites us to return, again and again, to small acts of grounding, a breath taken with intention, a moment of silence, a step away from stimulation, a prayer whispered not for escape, but for steadiness. These small acts may seem insignificant, but they are the architecture of peace. They are the quiet bricks that build an inner refuge strong enough to withstand external storms. And over time they teach us that peace is not something we wait to feel. It is something we practice into existence. To choose peace over chaos is also to understand the difference between control and surrender. Control tries to manage everything outside of us, attempting to organize the world into predictability. But this often leads to exhaustion because life resists being fully controlled. Surrender in the truest sense is not giving up. It is letting go of the illusion that we can hold everything at once. It is trusting that we can face what comes without needing to dominate what is beyond us. In surrender, peace finds space to breathe, not because the world becomes simpler, but because we stop resisting its complexity with unnecessary tension. And in that release, something remarkable happens. We become more capable, not less. We respond with clarity rather than panic. We move with intention rather than fear. Peace also reshapes how we relate to others. When we are governed by chaos within, we often project that chaos outward. We misunderstand intentions, react too quickly, speak from emotional overflow rather than thoughtful reflection. But when we choose peace, we begin to engage differently. We listen more fully, we respond more gently. We create space for understanding rather than conflict. This does not mean we avoid truth or silence our voice. On the contrary, peace allows us to speak truth more clearly because it is no longer entangled with emotional turmoil. It becomes possible to express ourselves without aggression, to set boundaries without hostility, to disagree without destruction. And perhaps one of the deepest truths about peace is that it protects the soul from fragmentation. Chaos pulls us in many directions at once. It divides attention, scatters energy, and leaves us feeling internally fractured. Peace, however, gathers us. It brings the scattered parts of ourselves back into alignment. It reminds us that we are not meant to live divided within ourselves. There is healing in this gathering, a sense of returning home to one's own presence, a recognition that beneath all external disturbances, there is a place within us that remains untouched. And when we learn to dwell in that place more often, life does not necessarily become easier, but it becomes more whole. So we practice, imperfectly but faithfully, the art of choosing peace. We return to it when we forget. We lean into it when chaos grows loud. We forgive ourselves when we are pulled away from it, and we begin again without shame. For peace is not maintained through perfection, but through return. And in this return, again and again, we discover something profound. That peace was never absent. It was always available, waiting patiently beneath the noise, ready to be chosen the moment we decide we are willing to come home to ourselves once more. There are moments in life when the human spirit grows impatient with the unfolding of its own story. It looks at the horizon and demands answers before the path has revealed itself. It presses its hands against the glass of time, asking for clarity that has not yet been given. And in this pressing, in this yearning, we often forget a sacred truth, that not everything meant for us arrives at the moment we desire it, but at the moment we are prepared to receive it. To trust the journey and divine timing is to learn the difficult art of surrendering urgency without surrendering hope. It is to hold faith in both hands while releasing the need for control. It is to walk forward even when the road ahead is only partially visible, believing that visibility is not the same as safety and uncertainty is not the same as abandonment. Life rarely unfolds in straight lines. It moves instead like a river, bending where we expected it to be direct, slowing where we demanded speed, and sometimes disappearing beneath terrain we cannot immediately trace. And yet, even when the river is unseen, it continues its movement. Trust asks us to believe in that movement even when our eyes cannot confirm it. There is a deep ache in waiting. It is not a passive emptiness, but an active stretching of the heart towards something not yet arrived. We wait for clarity, for healing, for direction, for answers, for doors to open, for seasons to shift. And in that waiting, the mind often becomes restless, tempted to force outcomes, tempted to rewrite timing, tempted to step ahead of what is still forming. But divine timing does not bend to human anxiety. It does not rush because we are afraid. It does not slow because we are uncertain. It moves with a wisdom that is not bound by our immediate perspective. And to trust it is to accept that there is a larger intelligence at work in the shaping of our lives, even when we cannot fully comprehend its design. This trust is not always easy. It is in fact often forged in the fire of disappointment. There are moments when we believe something should have arrived by now, an opportunity, a relationship, a breakthrough, a healing, and its absence feels like delay or even denial. But what feels like delay to us may be preparation in disguise. What feels like absence may be alignment still forming beyond our sight. For the human heart tends to measure timing by desire, but life measures timing by readiness. And readiness is not always visible from the outside. It is shaped quietly within us, through experiences we would not have chosen, through lessons we did not expect, through seasons that stretch our patience and deepen our understanding. To trust the journey is to believe that nothing is wasted. Not the detours, not the closed doors, not the unanswered prayers that seem to echo longer than comfort allowed. Each moment, even the difficult ones, participates in the shaping of who we are becoming. And who we are becoming must often be prepared before what we are waiting for can safely arrive. There is a sacred humility in accepting this. It is the humility of acknowledging that we do not see the full map. We see fragments, glimpses, partial understandings of a much larger unfolding. And yet we are asked to move forward as though what we cannot yet see is already being arranged for our good. This is where trust becomes more than belief. It becomes practice. It becomes the daily decision to continue without full certainty, to take the next step without full understanding, to release the need to control every outcome. And in this practice, something within us begins to soften. We begin to realize that not all delays are punishments. Some are protections. Some are refinements. Some are pauses that allow us to grow into the strength required for what is coming next. For what arrives too early can overwhelm us, and what arrives in time can sustain us. And so the journey is not only about reaching destinations, it is about becoming someone who can hold what arrives without breaking under its weight. Trusting divine timing means trusting that the pace of life is not random but responsive. It responds not only to what we want, but to who we are becoming. There are seasons in which nothing seems to move forward. Doors remain closed, answers remain silent, efforts seem to return without visible reward. And in these seasons, doubt often speaks loudly, suggesting that nothing is happening, that progress has stopped, that the story has stalled. But beneath the surface, life is often working in ways that are not immediately visible. Roots grow in darkness before they ever break through soil. Seeds undergo transformation unseen before they become visible growth. And in the same way, human transformation often occurs in hidden places, within reflection, within struggle, within waiting. What feels like stillness is often preparation disguised as pause. To trust the journey is to accept that visibility is not the only measure of movement. Some of the most important shifts in life occur inwardly, where they cannot be immediately measured or announced. A change in perspective, a deepening of resilience, a softening of resistance, a strengthening of faith. These are movements too, though they do not always announce themselves loudly. And so we learn to walk without constant proof. We learn to continue without immediate confirmation. We learn to trust that progress is not always visible, but it is still real. Divine timing also invites us to release comparison. For comparison is often the thief of trust. It whispers that others are ahead, that others have arrived sooner, that others are receiving what we are still waiting for. But comparison forgets that every life carries its own rhythm, its own unfolding, its own necessary sequence of preparation. No two journeys are identical in their timing. What is early for one may be late for another. What appears delayed may actually be perfectly aligned with a deeper design. And so trust requires us to step away from the measuring of our lives against others and instead return to the quiet assurance that our path is unfolding exactly as it must. There is also a gentleness required in trusting divine timing. We must learn not to turn our waiting into self-punishment. It is easy in moments of delay to become harsh with ourselves, to believe we have done something wrong, to assume that silence means rejection. But trust reminds us that silence is not absence, it is often preparation. And so we soften, we breathe, we allow ourselves to exist without constant explanation. We learn to be still without feeling stuck, to wait without feeling abandoned, to hope without demanding immediate arrival. In this space of trust, something extraordinary begins to happen. The urgency within us begins to quiet. The tension around outcomes begins to loosen, and we find ourselves more present, more aware, more able to recognize the small gifts that exist even in waiting. For life does not stop offering goodness simply because we are in between seasons. There is still beauty in ordinary moments. There is still meaning in slow progress. There is still grace in days that feel unfinished. To trust the journey is to believe that even the unfinished is sacred. And perhaps one of the deepest truths about divine timing is that it often reveals itself in hindsight. We look back and realize that what we once called delay was actually protection. What we once called rejection was actually redirection. What we once called waiting was actually preparation. But while we are in the middle of it, we are asked to trust without full understanding. And this is the spiritual work of patience, not passive endurance, but active faith in motion. So we continue walking, not because we see everything clearly, but because we trust that clarity will come in its time. We continue believing, not because we have all the answers, but because we have learned that answers unfold gradually. We continue hoping, not because everything is certain, but because we have chosen to believe that our story is still being written. And in this continued movement, something within us strengthens. We become less fragile in the face of uncertainty. We become less easily shaken by delay. We become more grounded in the quiet knowing that our lives are not forgotten, not overlooked, not abandoned to randomness. We are held within a timing that is larger than fear and deeper than impatience. And so we walk forward, not rushing ahead, not falling behind, but trusting that every step is arriving exactly when it is meant to. There is a certain way a human being learns to carry themselves through this world, not merely by the shaping of circumstance, but by the quiet decisions made in the unseen corners of the heart. Strength, grace, and purpose are not garments we put on when life demands performance. They are not masks for public display. They are the slow, sacred formation of a soul that has chosen to rise again and again, even when rising feels like the most difficult thing to do. To walk with strength is not to deny fragility. It is not to pretend that pain does not touch us or that disappointment does not leave its imprint. True strength is born in acknowledgement, not avoidance. It is the courage to say, yes, I have been shaken, and still choose to stand. It is the decision to remain rooted even when storms have passed through the landscape of our inner world, leaving debris where once there was certainty. Strength does not always roar. Often it breathes quietly in the background of endurance. It shows itself in the small acts that go unnoticed by others but are deeply significant within the self. The act of getting up when heaviness lingers. The act of continuing when motivation has gone silent. The act of choosing kindness when bitterness would be easier. These are not small things. They are the architecture of resilience. And yet strength alone is not enough to guide a life fully lived. Strength without grace can become rigid, hardened by experience, unwilling to bend, unwilling to forgive, unwilling to soften. This is why grace must walk beside strength, like a gentle companion reminding it that survival is not the only goal of existence. There is also beauty, there is also tenderness, there is also the possibility of softness that does not weaken us, but humanizes us. Grace is the ability to remain open in a world that often encourages closing. It is the decision to respond with understanding rather than retaliation, even when we have every reason to strike back. It is the quiet dignity of refusing to allow pain to transform us into something unrecognizable to ourselves. Grace is not weakness. It is mastery over the impulse to become what hurt us. There is a sacred balance between strength and grace that takes time to learn. Too much strength without grace can lead to hardness of heart. Too much grace without strength can lead to erosion of boundaries. But when they walk together, something extraordinary happens. We become both unshakable and compassionate, both firm and forgiving, both grounded and open. And then there is purpose, the thread that weaves both strength and grace into direction. Without purpose, strength can become mere endurance without meaning. Without purpose, grace can become gentleness without direction. But with purpose, both are illuminated. Purpose gives weight to endurance. It gives intention to gentleness. It transforms survival into meaning. To walk with purpose is to understand that life is not random motion but directed becoming. It is to recognize that even in confusion, even in delay, even in difficulty, there is a shaping occurring within us. Purpose does not always reveal itself fully at the beginning. Often it unfolds gradually, like dawn breaking over a horizon, revealing more of itself as we are able to see more clearly. There are days when purpose feels distant, when the question, "Why am I here?" echoes without immediate answer. In those moments, it is easy to believe that we are drifting without direction. But purpose is not always felt in intensity. Sometimes it is carried quietly in persistence. In the decision to keep going, in the refusal to give up on becoming, in the gentle awareness that even when clarity is absent, movement still matters. To walk with strength, grace, and purpose is to integrate 3 dimensions of being. Strength keeps us standing when life presses heavily upon us. Grace keeps us human when hardship tempts us toward hardness. Purpose keeps us moving forward when stillness begins to feel like stagnation. There is a dignity in this integration. It is not a loud dignity, not one that demands attention, but one that radiates from within. It is the dignity of a person who has known struggle but refuses to be defined by it alone. It is the dignity of someone who has been shaped by life but not diminished by it. And yet this way of walking is not achieved once and held forever. It is practiced, it is returned to, it is relearned in different seasons of life. There are moments when strength must be reawakened, when grace must be relearned, when purpose must be remembered. Life has a way of asking us to revisit what we thought we had already mastered. In this revisiting, humility becomes essential. For we are not static beings. We are always becoming. And becoming requires openness to growth, even when growth is uncomfortable. It requires willingness to see ourselves not as finished products, but as evolving stories still being written. Strength is often forged in moments we did not choose. It is shaped in circumstances that test our limits, that stretch our understanding of endurance. And yet even in these moments, strength is not something imposed upon us. It is something revealed within us. We discover it not in ease but in challenge. Grace, on the other hand, is often revealed in moments of choice. When we could respond with anger but choose understanding. When we could withdraw but choose compassion. When we could harden but choose to remain open. These moments define the texture of our character far more than grand declarations ever could. Purpose often reveals itself in hindsight. We look back and begin to see patterns, connections, meanings that were not visible in the moment. What once felt like detour begins to look like preparation. What once felt like delay begins to appear as alignment. What once felt like struggle begins to reveal itself as shaping. And so we learn to trust not only what we see now, but what may one day be understood. We learn to walk without full comprehension, but with full participation. We learn to be present in the unfolding without demanding immediate explanation for every chapter. There is also a quiet courage in choosing this way of living. It is not the courage of dramatic action, but the courage of daily intention. The courage to show up again and again with a willingness to remain aligned with one's deeper values. The courage to resist the temptation to abandon oneself when life becomes difficult. For one of the greatest dangers in hardship is not only external struggle but internal fragmentation, the slow drifting away from one's own sense of meaning, dignity, and worth. Strength, grace, and purpose work together to prevent this fragmentation. They gather the self, hold it steady, and remind it of its continuity. Strength says you can endure this. Grace says you can endure this without losing your humanity. Purpose says there is meaning even here. And when these three voices harmonize within us, something powerful emerges, a way of being that is not defined by circumstance alone. We are no longer simply reacting to life. We are participating in it with awareness. To walk with strength, grace, and purpose is also to understand that our presence in the world has impact beyond what we immediately perceive. The way we speak, the way we respond, the way we carry ourselves through difficulty, all of it contributes to the atmosphere around us. We become in subtle ways reminders to others of what is possible. This is not about perfection. It is about presence. It is about showing up in a way that reflects inner alignment rather than external performance. It is about choosing authenticity over appearance, even when authenticity is harder to maintain. There will be days when we falter. Days when strength feels thin, when grace feels distant, when purpose feels unclear. And in those days, the invitation is not to judge ourselves harshly, but to return gently, to begin again, to remember that walking is not a single act, but a continuous practice of returning to balance. For the journey of strength, grace, and purpose is not about never falling. It is about learning how to rise with greater awareness each time we do. And so we continue forward, not as those who have mastered life completely, but as those who are learning how to walk it with increasing intention. We continue with strength that is tempered by humility, with grace that is guided by wisdom, with purpose that is shaped by experience. And in this continued walking, we discover something profound, that the path itself is not separate from who we are becoming. The way we walk is part of the destination.